Hello and welcome to Decoding the New Economy. Today I'm joined by John Hagel, co-chair of Deloitte's Centre for the Edge, who's kindly decided to join us from Silicon Valley. John, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, let's kick off first with what the Centre for the Edge is.
Sure. Basically, it's a research center that was set up by Deloitte about 7 years ago. I was recruited in to help build it and run it, and so I've been involved in it for 7 years.
Now you've got quite a background in this. You've come from McKinsey and various other places. What is your background?
Broadly, I've been in Silicon Valley for almost 30 years. I've done a couple of startups in Silicon Valley, so I've been on the startup side. I worked with Atari in the video game business a long time ago, set up strategy, and I was with McKinsey for 16 years and helped set up their Silicon Valley office as well as their e-commerce practice. Back in 1993, I founded the e-commerce practice.
So you've seen a few of these cycles already?
Absolutely, absolutely.
What do you find notable about this cycle of innovation and technological change?
I think the biggest thing for me is just the fact that nothing is stabilizing. I mean, I often go back into history and look at things like electricity and the steam engine, telephone, all hugely disruptive to business practices. But the interesting pattern, they all had a burst of innovation and then rapidly kind of a leveling off of price performance improvement. You could stabilize and you could start to figure out how to use all this technology. With digital technology, there is no stabilization. At least at this point, we're still seeing exponential improvements in price performance and disruptions continuing to spill out.
And that's what you're saying with the disruptions there. You had a recent paper on exponential innovation,
yes.
Which I thought was a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it's a notion, first of all, that we do have these exponential technologies, the core technologies of computing, storage, and bandwidth, but then an increasing expansion and integration of other technologies like 3D printing, as an example, which now starts to affect physical products. It's not just virtual data and content shifting around, it's actually making physical products and driven by the same exponential technologies. So increasingly our view is that it's creating a challenge for companies, traditional businesses, to say, we've been operating in a linear fashion for decades and perhaps even a century or more, but how do we move to an exponential approach to innovation that's really going to help us to harness this technology and not be overwhelmed by it?
So what's your advice to businesses that are facing that exponential innovation?
Well, one of the key themes in our research is the need to think about innovation at a different level, not just technology and product innovation, but think about it as a form of institutional innovation and go back to the most basic question of all, which is, why do we have institutions? I think in traditional business, the rationale is very clear. It was scalable efficiency. You could become much more efficient by scaling an organization. And it worked for a century or more as a key rationale. Partly because of digital technology now, the ability to connect with and coordinate activity across a large number of participants calls into question, is that really the compelling rationale?
Right.
Increasingly, our view is that because of these exponential technologies, the rationale that's going to be most compelling and ultimately drive a whole new wave of institutions is around scalable learning.
Right.
How do we actually learn faster? And the rationale for coming together in institutions is that we'll learn faster as part of those than we would on our own or part of any other institution. But it's a very different, it has implications across the board in terms of how you organize and how you operate a business.
Well, I was going to say that's got some big implications for management as well.
Yes, yes. I mean, at a high level, again, think about if you're in the model of scalable efficiency, there are some key requirements: predictability, standardization of activities. You want everything to be standardized so it can be more efficient. You want to tightly specify all the activities so they can be predictable. You want to tightly integrate all the activities because you want to remove those inefficient buffers across activities. Now think about it in the context of learning. if you want to advance learning and amplify learning, learning's not predictable. You know, there's going to be a lot of failure. It requires much more risk-taking than if you're in a scalable efficiency model. It requires space to innovate, to tinker, to experiment, and if you've got highly standardized, highly specified activities, the potential for learning is pretty minimal. And so it really requires a very different set of practices and management approaches than the scalable efficiency model.
Yeah. So how do you see that, the implications of that for education as well? Because that strikes me that that's got some, particularly for degree type courses, pretty big implications.
No, well, I think that at the end of the day we focus on companies as institutions, but this whole notion of shifting the rationale for institutions, I think, plays across all institutions, education as well. I mean, at a highly oversimplified level, but traditional educational institutions are all about what we would describe as a push-based model of education, right? The minute you're born, I can tell you what you need to learn in 1st grade, 6th grade, 12th grade, on up. And your job is to read the assignments, take the tests, and advance at that level. But in an exponential world, the ability to anticipate what a person's going to need to learn at any point in time is much less, and it becomes much more driven by the individual as opposed to by the institution. So it's going to require a very different approach to education, very different approach to government, very different approach to all our institutions.
Yeah. So which industries do you see as being the most change in the medium term?
In the medium term, I think it's still industries that are very much information-based or content-based. So obviously one of the early targets of all this change was the media industry, which is going through profound transformation and disruption. But anything that has high degree of information content, so healthcare, financial services would be another example. Those industries we think are going to have significant challenges ahead as these exponential technologies play out.
So where would you be saying to a young entrepreneur looking at setting up a disruptive business what the next frontier is and opportunity?
There's no shortage of opportunity. I think the key question is entry points into particular markets or industries. But one of the things that we see as a very high potential is the notion, so one of the core themes of, or implications of this exponential technology is increasing power of the customer. As customers, we all benefit enormously from access to more information about products, proliferation of options, ability to move from one option to another much more easily. In that kind of world where the customer is more and more powerful, there's an emerging opportunity around what we would describe as becoming a trusted customer advisor. It's basically getting to know you as an individual customer better and better, and based on that knowledge, being more helpful to you in terms of suggesting, recommending things that you may not have even asked for or be aware of, but turn out to be enormously relevant to you. And it's crossing the table rather than being a vendor trying to push more products and services at the customer. It's sitting next to the customer and saying, you know, let's think about what your needs are, and here are some options you might not have thought about. Very different model. You can think about it as, at one level, in the very affluent segments, personal wealth advisors, personal shoppers. But in the past, you could only do that if the person had a lot of money to spend, because it required an enormous effort to get to know you as an individual. Now we think there's an opportunity to take that to the mass market and become a trusted customer advisor, regardless of your income level or spend level. And so for a new entrepreneur, I'd say that's a really interesting place to play.
Well, that's exciting times indeed. John, thank you very much for joining Decoding the New Economy.
Pleasure.
And thank you for joining Decoding the New Economy.